Well, hello again, everybody. Welcome to Solutions with Aquarius Rising Africa. You see, even my phone is notifying me that I'm on, so thank you. With our double dose Jessie Day, so I'm sure that we're going to have lots of happy people. And also, if you guys didn't manage to catch the first one, I know it's probably quite early for a lot of you Americans. When we say goeiemorgen in the morning, it's probably very early for you, but over here it's like a little bit late. So if you haven't caught the first episode on Aquarius Rising Africa, Jessie was just doing basically protocols and procedures for the gateway experience. So what we're going to be doing now is actually going sort of more into the actual gateway experience itself. And as I said before, guys, seriously, this is the information we need to know. This is the information, in my opinion, that is key to probably everything that we should know. Or if not everything, I'm going to go with everything for now. And look at Jessie just smiling, you know. She just sits there smiling. She won't yay or nay it.
Right?
Right
On
now,
my mind, I'm sitting there thinking, like we're going to give certain people something to talk about today, but not what they want. We're not going to teach you how to have an out-of-body experience. We're not going to teach you,
I can't believe that. I
how to
just,
imagine this
Jessie,
stuff.
you,
But, I mean, are we going to talk about high levels of magic and witchcraft? Are we going to, talk about Aquino and the U.S. military and their use of black magic and witchcraft? Oh, we are. So,
oh yeah. But I have to tell you, I almost convinced her off air, guys. I have to tell you this. Maybe she'll still do it. I almost convinced her to teach you how to have an out of body experience, but she decided not to. She decided it might be a little bit
almost.
risky. Almost. I nearly manipulated her. I still haven't managed that yet. Out of 3 years of having Jessie on my channel, I've still not managed to manipulate her.
Right.
Lovely.
Someday.
Okay, well,
It's just easier to open the gate, Chantel. You just got
true
to keep
story.
practicing. You'll get it. You'll get it one of these days.
It's the right gate, Jess. It's the right gate, right?
If anybody can move the hand of God and get them back open, I'm certain it's you.
There you go. I look forward to that. Yeah. So I'll have you guys know all of this in just a few days then. So watch this space. Guys, this is fun. The Gateway Experience, declassified CIA document, basically explaining the processes they use in mind control to weaponize kids for the military. And even if those children are the Britney Spears of the world, they're still being weaponized to lure, especially I would imagine kids, people in on a whole different level because there's so many ways that this operates. That's why I say it's such a huge web.
Yeah.
Web. Speaking about webs. Anyway, we'll get there. The arachnids. So let's talk about the gateway experience.
Yeah. And it's interesting that, you know, we got to start with terms because terms are very meaningful. They're implying a lot. And, there's a reason they don't call this the Gateway Project or the Gateway Experiment. Part of that is because, they're trying to get funding for what they're doing. And, technically, government is not supposed to fund projects or experiments, especially if they deal with children. So, what did we all get? We got an experience, and let me tell you, it was quite the experience. So, this, be mindful of the time frame. This report was done, June 9th, 1983, which that was, right when I was in the crux of, the more advanced parts of my training with the spiritual gates. I had already done my stint at the military base out there in Maryland with the ocean and stuff and the water training. So, at that point, The primary bases I was still operational or working at, usually, were the Chicago or NORAD, but not exclusive to those two. There was times other things were at play with that, but those were the main ones. This guy was working directly with Fort Meade, which was kind of, it works along with the Maryland base. The other Maryland base with the ocean, with the Navy, but the Fort Meade is, the Army part of this. And, we've got through all five branches of the military, really, where, you've got this type of training going on. And, I just want to kind of put this out here, this book here, because this is going to be kind of important to what we're talking about. It's Fire Force, a Star Wars parody by Michael Aquino. So one of the books that he's written. And, way back when he wrote this book, let's kind of look at some dates here. It doesn't say the 1970s, but you have United States Space Intelligence Officer. So I would conclude that before, Space Force even fully came around, that we did have stuff going on. And what does Aquino state about this book? And it really plays into some of the stuff we're going to be reading. He says, I had access to resources at the U.S. Space Command, NORAD, and the National Reconnaissance Office, enabling unprecedented precision in space sci-fi, as well as the libraries at the Central and Defense Intelligence Agencies and the National Archives for the characters in this book, who he's calling Dr. Jones' Adventures. Accordingly, so the ventures he's writing about in this book, where did he get it from? He had access and resources to the U.S. Space Command, NORAD, and National Reconnaissance Office, enabling unprecedented precision in space sci-fi, and also through the libraries of the Central and Defense Intelligence Agencies and National Archives. And he says, accordingly, you will come across much in these pages, which, as fantastic as it sounds at first glance, is quite real. This, too, I feel, is part of the philosophical parody challenge to tantalize the reader's curiosity and discernment. So, I propose, if people want to know further information, Michael Aquino embedded all of his codes in his books, so I'll just kind of put that out there. So as we're thinking about this, at Fort Meade, the commander who's doing this report, their goal is to get funding. There's certain qualifications that they have to get in order to get that funding. So he's presenting this analysis and assessment, to the commander for the U.S. Army Operational Group. That's a key word, operational. So that means that they're beyond the testing and the experimenting phase. What he's presenting in 1983 is operational. So first he says, you tasked me to provide an assessment of the Gateway experience in terms of its mechanics and ultimate practicality. As I set out to fulfill that tasking, it soon became clear that in order to assess the validity and practicality of the process, I needed to do enough supporting research and analysis to fully understand how and why the process works. So how and why does this, access to the spirit world work? Frankly, sir, that proved to be an extremely involved and difficult business. Initially, based on conversations with a physician who took the Gateway training with me, I had recourse to the biomedical models developed by Bentoff to obtain information concerning the physical aspects of the process. Then I found it necessary to delve into various sources for information concerning quantum mechanics in order to be able to describe the nature and the functioning of the human consciousness. I had to be able to construct a scientifically valid and reasonably lucid model of how consciousness functions under the influence of the brain hemispheres um, employed by Gateway. Once this is done, the next step involved recourse to theoretical physics in order to explain the character of the time-space dimension and the means by which expanded human consciousness transcends it in archiving Gateway's objectives. Finally, I again found it necessary to use physics to bring the whole phenomena of outer-body states into the language of physical science to remove the stigma of its occult connections. So why is he explaining it scientifically? To remove the stigma that it is connected to the occult and to put it in a frame of reference suited to objective assessment. So they want to present, spirituality through science is another way to put that. Um, Interestingly enough, if he had stuck with spirituality to explain spirituality, he could have just turned to the books of Daniel and John. In there, we have two examples in the Bible where God, separated a man's spirit from his body and pulled his spirit up to heaven, leaving the body on the earth. And it talks about the repercussions of that for both Daniel and John, who had those experiences, that when their spirit returned to their body, there was a lot of physical drain. They were sick for a couple of weeks. Um, so, we know that out of body experiences are something that can happen. Scripture describes it. Um, does it make it right to procure it on our own or to make it happen? That's where I would say no. In both those circumstances, we see the Lord Himself uh, did the out of body experience. Um, and again, we've got two different forms of, seeing into the spirit world, or what they call remote viewing. The other form, is where your spirit stays in your body, but you see things through vision. And, there's a lot of scriptures that talk about visions and seeing into the heavens, seeing into, you know, the different things that the Lord has made. And I think that that's the way that God really intended it to be, was that we see things through both our physical and our spiritual body at the same time, but not having that separation. So he goes on, he says, I began the narrative by briefly profiling the fundamental biomedical factors affecting such related techniques as hypnosis, biofeedback, and transcendental meditation. So remember, we talked about, how are they in their initial processes as they're training or as they're getting people operational, how are they going to do that? They use one of those three methods. They either use hypnosis, they use the transcendental meditation, or they use biofeedback. My process that I learned was biofeedback. So in that, you, like both hypnosis and meditation, there's an initiator that gets you into that state. So either it's the hypnosis, or, you enter into that state through meditation. So that's the initiator. In biofeedback, that happens after you've had the experience, where then they're looking at what did you sense, feel, touch, hear, see, and they, you go through more analytical means. So they're going to have you draw pictures. They're going to have you answer questions, give details. So a little bit different processes. So through those techniques, they learned um, the mode of functioning could be compared in the reader's mind with the gateway experience as a model of its underlying mechanics as those were developed. Additionally, the introductory material is useful in supporting the conclusions of the paper. I indicate that at times these related techniques may provide useful entry points to accelerate movement into the gateway experience. So again, those techniques that they taught were indeed entry points into that experience in the spirit world. He then, his third point, he talks about Niels Bohr, the renowned physicist, once responded to his son's complaints about the obtruse nature of certain concepts in physics by saying, "You are not thinking, you are merely being logical." And, when we're talking about the spirit world, in a sense, all logic goes out the window, because you're not looking at things one dimensionally. You're not looking at things that are concrete or tangible. You're dealing with a place that has no time, no space, some of it no definition. These are the things where scripture says that, that the word of God has height and depth and breadth and width. And, it's forever, it's everlasting. So there's things that still, there are no words for, because, we aren't aware of all of his creation. There's so much more for us still to study. The physics of altered human consciousness deals with some conceptualizations that are not easily grasped or visualized exclusively in the context of ordinary left brain linear thinking. So, to borrow from Bohr's mode of expression, parts of this paper will require not only logic, but a touch of right brain intuitive insight to achieve a complete, comfortable grasp of the concepts involved. Nevertheless, once that is done, I am confident that their construction and application will stand up to the test of rational critique. Paradoxically, having gone to such great lengths to avoid trying to render judgments based on an occult or dogmatic frame of reference, in the end, I found it necessary to return, at least briefly, to the question of the impact of the gateway experience on common belief systems. So they're saying that, once seen what's explained to the world, that this will impact, common belief systems. He said, I did so because although it is essential to avoid attempting to render an assessment in the context of such systems, I felt it necessary. Oh, wait, let me go on. I felt it, where'd we go? Necessary after having completed this analysis to point out the resulting conclusions do not do any violence to the fundamental mainstream of Eastern or Western belief systems. Unless that point is clearly established, the danger exists that some people will reject the whole concept of the gateway experience in the mistaken belief that it contradicts and is therefore alien to all that they hold to be right and true. So what is he saying is that it's not contradictory, nor alien is it to what we believe is right and true. I believe that that's particularly targeted at those who had Christian beliefs. Says this study is certainly not designed to be the last word on the subject, but I hope that the validity of its basic structure and of the fundamental concepts upon which it is based will make it a useful guide for other U.S. COM personnel who are required to take the gateway training or work with gateway materials. So that was Wayne McDonald who wrote that. Colonel, we'll say lieutenant. So as we get into this now, it kind of goes back to, exactly what we were, beginning to read. so some of this is going to be very similar to the pre-primer that we had. There'll be some things that are added to it as we kind of get into it. But he starts off with an introduction into the brain hemisphere synchronization in perspective. In his introduction, he says, in order to describe the Monroe Institute technique for achieving altered states of consciousness, it involves the brain hemisphere synchronization, or the hemisync. The most effective way to begin is to briefly profile the basic mechanics that underlie the operation. So that's where he starts. And, what are those basic things that as you begin to go into this experience, you have to have an access point into the spiritual world. So, he talks about what are those access points, hypnosis and transcendental meditation and biofeedback. So what did that look like in practicality? Let's think about this. As a kid, first, you're put into core groups. They're going to be testing. I've talked about how my testing groups usually had about 20 kids, and they would put us through an experience. They're going to see how we're reacting to that experience. Some of the first things, we had teachers that would, take us on world trips. And, I can remember the first time the teacher was like, all right, we're going to go to the South Pole. And, she would get us excited. She'd be like, have you ever seen a polar bear? What about Santa Claus? Elves, maybe are those there? Then as she starts, and I'm going to put this out there for any survivors that have triggers. I have no specific.
Shanti, you're moving. Is it JC?
Thanks, Jesse's gone.
Okay, am I back?
Yeah, you're back.
All right. So I'm going to kind of change things. I'm not going to, do the backwards counting in key because I'm not hypnotizing. But, the teacher would say things like, pineapple, 4, 3, and then we say watermelon, 2, 1. I throw in those terms so that, there's no hypnosis and stuff. But she would start counting backwards. And then what she's looking for in that is which of the children responded to that hypnosis and are now not fully awake. They're kind of in that zoned out trance state. So then they know that those children are pliable to hypnosis, and they're going to then connect them with the teachers that are, working to do the gateway experience through hypnosis. Now, if you're like me, you're still sitting there and you're like, okay, well, this isn't exactly fun. Like, what's going on? Like, I'm not, necessarily seeing anything. Next, then they're going to go to, oh, well, that's because you're not quiet enough. You got to enter into your quiet space, and you do that through silence. So you sit there for about 2 seconds because, I was not one that could be really quiet for long. And, I'm still sitting there all antsy, getting bored now, like, okay, like nothing's happening. Is something supposed to be happening? Like, these other kids seem to be in a trance in nap time, and I'm just still sitting there fully awake. And, so now they've weeded out the second group. They know who can enter in through meditation. And, then all of a sudden, comes my turn where it's like, oh, they say, what do you see? And it's like, oh, wow, yeah, actually I am seeing stuff. And what do you see? So then they begin to ask the questions. And, as I'm seeing in the spirit, I'm able to physically answer, with details of what I'm experiencing, what I'm seeing. So those are some of the base things that, they would begin to figure out, which way you're going to enter into those projects and experiments. With the transcendence, part of that they're going to use different forms of Kundalini magic that they're going to, acquaint you with. For me, there had to be physical things that would help me to see unless the Lord was showing me. So that was part of the struggle in their control, is that um, they couldn't necessarily control when, how, or what I was seeing and experiencing. All they could do was ask questions and glean where I was at in what I was experiencing. So in that, they tried to then align you with teachers who experience things in the spirit world just like you do. So, after you go through the initial testing, and I'll just explain, I'm sure it's probably different for other children, but my experience with the high level teachers that I had was then I started to do the rounds with the different grand high priest and priestesses. So, one of the first teachers they connected me to was Michael Carcock. Why? Because he sees in remote views like I do, you know. Um, he was not one that had out of body experiences, yet he could change the physical and spiritual states of his body. He was one of the highest level black magic individuals that
What do
I
you mean?
knew.
What do you mean by that? Can you explain how he changed the physical and spiritual states of his body? You mean he shapeshifted?
Mostly he could change from being in a physical state to the spiritual state. So in the military, they call those ghost warriors, where they can, walk through walls, come through floors. Um, they can be invisible. Um, so he was able to do those things in defense magic, and be untraceable, untrackable. Um, so,
Wow.
um, yeah, so he was the first, and really his job was, as we're going through this, you have to remember that they're really talking about an experience with spiritual gates and spiritual dimensions. Um, so he was able to access all the dimensions, both heavenly and lower realms. So, as we started our training together, he's teaching the difference between those realms. He's connecting me with different people that can figure out, my soul resonance, and, what music I need to hear, what vibrations or frequencies I need to be able to access those realms. Um, they begin to build a cipher code, um, that then helps you know what you need to be able to access those places. Um, they never will just send you into the spiritual realm at the beginning unaccompanied. So they want, their best trained people who can accompany you in those experiences to get you back, and to, help you be able to process what you are experiencing while you're in the spiritual dimension, as well as when you come out of the spiritual dimension. Um, so he was one of the top people. Um, as he did that, he was teaching spiritual warfare techniques as well, because you do run into spirit beings as you're um, accessing certain gates, certain places. or we'll just say there's garters of some of the smaller gates. Many of the smaller gates are at the castles or mansions that are in the different areas or at certain military bases. So, you can't just go pop in into somebody else's territory unannounced or, without being able to clearly define while you're there, because this is warfare. It's over a jurisdictional authority, or you're trying to get authority over a jurisdictional area that is not owned by any man per se or any nation. Yet you have the Luciferian Brotherhood that controls it and, has gone to all extents to seek out where those spiritual gates are and,
So
and
that
have
would
control
be
of those gates.
the time ghost, zeitgeist, time ghost. Is that the same thing? I see Renee's put it in the chat there, and I was actually going to ask about that. Is this what you would, yeah, the time ghost? What they would like, what Michael Carcock does. That's where you can move in and out of dimensions, hop
Right.
timelines, you would imagine, all of that stuff. So would that be part and parcel of that? Is that the same sort of thing?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
And it's all just on your spiritual sight. How you see and perceive, both backwards as well as forwards. I would propose that you really cannot change past timelines to influence the future. That's part of what they want to try to do, but everything, moves forward. You can't change back. You can change things going forward,
In the
which is why
moment.
they want to, know ahead of time. They're looking for people who
Hmm.
can see forward,
Exactly.
so that they can change those things. Yeah.
The movie Back to the Future, then that brings that movie to mind. Back to the Future, which was also created, I'm going to say 80s. That was when I'm sure Michael J. Fox is probably my age as well, because it was round about
Hmm.
that era I was watching movies. I don't watch them anymore. So would Back to the Future be what we're kind of talking about here? So sort of what they would do is then get into that, obviously that time machine, whatever that thing's called, go back in time, recreate events. In other words, turn back clocks, change
Hmm.
conversations or whatever in order to readjust and recalibrate the frequencies for the future. So, what would that movie then be about in terms of this? What are they trying to tell us through that movie? If you're saying it can't be done, why would they make it possible in that movie? Are they trying to tell us it is possible?
I think that they're putting the theories out there because they want to have it be possible, and they want to prepare people if they're able to do that. But I think the main reason in doing that is because it promotes their agenda and the things that they want to release. Part of that being the great apostasy. If they have people convinced that they can change the past, well, now you can undo the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. You no longer need a Lord or a Savior because there's another way of salvation for humanity, where humanity itself enters into a state of godhood, and you no longer need God, which then feeds into their agenda that we are gods, and that we can usurp the throne of God and take that place. So I think that it feeds into their great apostasy, which is why they want us to believe it.
Wow, very interesting.
Yes.
It's amazing how this all just comes together. It's so crazy. But who would have thought that was one of my favorite movies of the time. I think it's one of those I watched several times just because
Yeah,
I liked it so much.
me too.
But
It's simply just a priori approved, the board of
yeah,
the occultic system, approves the narrative so that it fits into their long-term agendas and goals, you know. Even in Bibles and
wow,
seminaries, they do the same thing. I can remember when Q Source was going through the seminaries big time. They were teaching that source, was before the books of Matthew and Mark, and that's where the authors had to have gotten some of their stories or information. And then, when they introduce Q source, then it's more likely to be believed, as the ancient source.
wow, yeah.
Yeah, and that's why they control all
Description is right.
the finding of the relics, and the finding of the religious relics and the meaning of those religious relics. They control all that so they can control the narrative from any perspective. So as we get into that, now we know like what they use for the access points and modes, and they can scientifically prove to the military as they're doing this. They bring in their best of the best. Um, you know, um, to display the different ways that the spiritual realm can be accessed. Um, some of that for me, they would have world leaders or top military people who would be present. They would gather into the room. Um, Initially, they're going to enter and be part of that circle that you're creating. When I talk about that type of circle that you're going to create, those are the Solomonic magic summoning circles. So within that, you're going to have, different people who are gathering, and, they're going to put you front and center. They want to see what you can do. Who can you, um, where can you go? Which dimensions can you access? And who can you bring with you? Um, who's going to have that experience with you? And, so you begin to look at the biomechanics of those experiments and different techniques. They're going to, some of them they're going to see if you can feel spiritually. So you're going to have certain people, in that experience, they're going to take your hand, they're going to walk with you through it, they're going to be talking to you the whole time. May not be actual verbal communication, maybe, what they classify as telepathy or spirit to spirit communication. And, so they're going to begin to look at those fundamental things. They're going to explore with you. Um, as you do that, you learn that these military bases are not just on physical ground, that these military bases intersect on spiritual ground as well. Uh, so you do have certain military bases where everything is run in the spirit world, which means, to get into that base, you have to be in your spiritual state. Um, there really isn't a physical state in that. Um, it says, fundamentally, the gateway experience is a training system designed to bring enhanced strength, focus, and coherence to the amplitude of frequency of brainwave output between the left and the right hemispheres. So you can enter into that alter consciousness, moving outside of physical spheres and ultimately escape even the restrictions of time and space. Um, you know, and you're going to have different light, you're going to have different frequency and different um, audio things that begin to be introduced, so as you go into this experience. from my experience, the major 4 bases that we had talked about, so that would be like Chicago, NORAD. You've got the naval base out of Maryland and the California base um, near Palisades there underground. Um, you know, they're going to begin to, or let me just put it this way, maybe they have what we call simulations. So a simulation room is going to be kind of like a bypass room where you're going from the physical into the spiritual. Those can look different based on those different bases. Based on your soul resonance, they're going to start with different colors, um, colored lighting to get you into those different, to see where you access those different realms from. So, you know, um, you'll see the different rainbow colors, red, and then you'll get orange, then you'll get yellow, green, blue, purple. Um, and, you know, kind of how they do that, as you go on in your training is that, the first few times you learn that red gets you through a certain door, orange gets you through a certain door, into a certain simulation room. And then as you progress, you're always looking for the next light or the next stage to get through there. And initially, those environments seem safe, fun, a lot of curiosity. And then, they begin to throw things at you where you start to really have experiences in the spirit world. And you have to, learn to transition, react, respond um, to those situations. The first time you're introduced to things, it's going to be very controlled. You feel like your life's in danger. And so, your fight and flight responses are going to be operating over time, but they want to see what your initial reactions are. So they're going to introduce different things in those simulation rooms. One of them, um, and again, I'm going to put a trigger warning out there if you think that you've had some of these experiences and have had a difficult time. We're going to say a quick prayer and ask the Lord to just safely guard our hearts and minds as we talk about it. So, Lord, as we get into this next part, we're just asking for every survivor that you guard our heart and mind in Christ Jesus. Lord, we believe that you've not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and sound mind. So we claim that right and that authority to go back, to think through these things, to look at our memories. And we thank you that you are going to hold us fast, that you are going to ground us through this, that you are going to bring us to that place where we can understand the things that we've experienced and gone through, and to the place where we can have healing through them. So we thank you for that, Lord, and just pray this in your name, Jesus. So, one of the simulation rooms, you start off where there's, like a stream or a lake. It's kind of more like a lake. And as you're at this lake, there's a lot of red clay. There's like a cavern that you see with a big, cavern opening that the water goes into. Um, as you go in there the first time, first few times actually, you'll experience things where, as you're going into the cavern, the water will start to rise, and you get flushed out. So, there's fear in that because at first, like if you're deeper in that cavern and the water starts to rise, you feel like you're going to get trapped. Um, unless you use your water training, you're going to have a drowning experience in that. Um, so, they're trying to get you to use some of the initial techniques and methods, and they want to see, when you're responding, are you going to you know, respond out of fear and, you know, be unfunctional, non-useful, or are you going to be able to step up to the plate and put your training into practice? You know, then as you get further, they're going to start adding things into that water. I'll just kind of generally put it as dead things. And, you know, your first reaction is utter fear and dread, you know, as the water changes colors and you're seeing these dead things and you get flushed out with it. And if you can't get past that, you know, pretty much you're stuck with that experience. They're going to put you in another simulation room and you start, you know, that base stuff all over again, but you never get to the next levels. So what they're looking for are those that, you know, are going to follow the objective, which is to find the doors. There's 3 doors that you have to find. And what do you have to do? You have to make it through everything that they put in your path, through that water, get into that cavern, no matter what's coming your way, hell, high water, not being able to breathe. You got to find that platform where those 3 doors are. When you get there, you see what looks like 3 submarine doors. Um, you can walk all the way around them, and they're just there in the cavern. You can see the back of the cavern, but then you have to get those doors open. The one on the left is they're all color coded, but the left starts with the red and the orange. The right has the green, the yellow, the blue, and then you've got some of the blue and the purple that are in that middle door. Now, the first few times, they're not just going to allow you to pick whichever door you want, even though they tell you to pick which door you want to go through. Um, so as you open, you know, the red and the orange door, that's going to be where you get training in, you know, the air, and you're going to, you know, kind of enter into what kind of looks like this Jurassic period with lots of Jurassic things in there. And, you know, you can be stuck in that simulation room as long as you need to be stuck there. Again, the goal is find the door, um, find the access point, and get out. Can you create your own access points? You can, but they don't tell you that right away. In the last door you go through on the right, that one is more for underground earth things. You know, so you're going to have to use different elements as you go through. And again, they're honing. They want to see where are your skills, what are you best at, where are you best functioning. The middle one is where you get into, we'll say, the gardens. But in that, you got a lot of water as well in those gardens. And that's where you're going to start to see some of the unworldly things and the depths of the horrors of what they've created in that world. So I'm not going to get into those today, but
And this is
you've got
all
these different
simulation.
things. Is what?
It's all simulation. What you're going through, yeah, this is all
They
simulation.
call them simulations because they're created worlds. Like they've created them, therefore they're simulations. But it's not virtual. You could have virtual aspects to them, but you've got a real place that is existing in a spiritual dimension. So
Wow.
you have the physical and the spiritual intersecting. Um, and in a way, these simulation rooms are obstacle courses. Um, so you're going to, you know, get different challenges and obstacles as you're trying to make your way through. Each
Wow.
obstacle that you pass is going to have a pass or fail. If you fail, you end up at the beginning of that and have to go through it again.
Or you
If you
die. Is that what
pass,
you're saying? There are times that you can die. There are times that people die during these obstacle courses.
and are raised back to life, yes.
What? You're kidding me. There is
It's nasty, yeah. Yeah, it gets nasty, you know. And they'll
How does
bring you
that
back
happen?
too, which,
How? I've heard that. Can you
well, through
explain how?
magic. Yeah, I mean, through magic, they bring you back. Some of it is faked death, where you feel like you've died, but really you haven't. Some of it, depending on how you remote view, um, it's basically they're going to bring you to a near-death experience where it separates, causes that out-of-body experience. So it depends
Is that
on your specialty, your training, what you're going to experience, and the depth of that experience.
is that what the drown proofing's about as well? Because I'm just looking here what Prince is saying. To pass the proofing evolution, you had to stay submerged for 9 minutes plus. So there's a lot of water. They use a lot of water for their training and simulations, I notice here. But as you say, the other doors are
Yeah,
other things, right? So it's really, we
correct.
just, yeah, wow.
Yeah. All based on the elementals, you're gonna have you're gonna have in that first one too, the Jurassic, that's where you're gonna have some of the air, but you're also gonna have some of the fire training. The fire and the water are the most, I guess I would say, like, expansive of the trainings. Um, Usually even those that have air or earth specialties, they also are going to have water and fire as that foundational background, um, because it's the most expansive. Um, so, you'll get training in all of that, and you'll see, you won't just see distinctly air. There'll be elements that you have to walk through with that of fire and water too, everywhere you go. So that's why, like, your basics are at those four main bases, because they're training you in that water and that fire training.
So the four main bases will obviously then be the four different elements representing the four different elements.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. And
Sure.
you're able to, in that there's free expression, they want you to step into that place of your magic authority. They want to see what extents you'll go to. They want to see what your full abilities are. So they're going to push it to find out what are your full abilities. Um,
Yeah.
you know, Therefore the training is, I mean, it's extensive. Night and Day does not describe it in a place where you don't have time, yet you
Yeah.
learn to associate your training sessions with nighttime or your daytime training, even though, really you have no time or differentials between night and day in that training. It feels like you're in this endless hell loop, to be honest, that just never ends. You can't get out of
And
it no matter how hard you try. And oftentimes the escape leads you to a worse hell than you were already in. And you're like, oh my gosh, like, how
yeah.
do I break free of this nightmare? Um, and yet you're rewarded, but you're not rewarded for good. Like when you're in there, as you go further into this training, um, they're going to have you in there sometimes with other people, whether it's your peers, whether it's others who are training you. Um, you're going to have others, and sometimes the others are random. So they're not, people that you're going to be operational with. And I think that they do that solely um, to try to convince you to use expressions of evil in your magic. Um, when you do harm to others in those experiments or in those simulation rooms, you're rewarded. So, a lot of kids will quickly turn to that dark side because of the rewards. If you don't turn to that dark side, they make it 10 times worse for you, and you have to really like endure and persevere through, and at your own cost. So it costs you something to pull other kids through that with you unharmed. And usually in the end, they'll find a way to kill them off anyway. So, all of your trouble and trial was for nothing. Doesn't matter if you get them through that end door, you'll get through that end door and they'll kill them on the spot right in front of your face, you know? So, that's part of the harshness of this. Um, Hunger Games is a movie that's come out, I believe is based off of some of this. And you can get the basics of what those simulation rooms were like through that, and the people behind the scenes of those simulation rooms. Um, they're trained to be non-emotional. They're trained to just do their job and perform it. Um, you know, and the sick part is, through all this training, is that you get moments they know that, in order to keep you going, they have to stop and care for you. They have to make sure you're eating. They have to make sure you're resting. They have to make sure if you've got wounds that they're getting healed up. So, that's why they have it in the sessions. They'll pull you out sometimes if you don't get to the access points by a certain time. And, then you get the witchy healers, and, I call them the witchy hands, which I hated above everything, having to lay on those tables and have those hovering hands over me and all that staticky feeling electricity. Um,
Wow.
there were times I would fight and they would have to strap me down to that table, which I hated even worse. And, I would fight um, when they strapped me down, and, would just be screaming that I did not want those witchy hands. It's like, no, I will take my wound and I will bear it proudly. And then it was like, darn it, they erased my evidence again. I would be so mad, because I would leave all of it. You'd go through that hell and you'd have nothing to prove that you went through the hell.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
you know,
Scarred inside, internally, all the internal scars, right? Wounds
right?
that
Your body
they've been.
remembers. Your body
Exactly.
remembers, and yet you have to act as though even when your body auto reacts that way, you have to really try to control those auto reactions, which is extremely hard because your body just naturally goes there. What happens then is, then you begin to start, because of the simulation rooms, many of those environmental things start to become triggers for you. Um,
Mm.
so I know for me, and I know many other survivors who've gone through this, where, especially like, let's just say after the training at the naval base, initially with the water, you go through that, the drowning experiences. You go through the experiences with the sea creatures, which, start off really nice, and, you fall in love with these animals, and all of a sudden they're turning on you and they're your enemies that are attacking you. um, then you get where in the, we'll just say the real world, in your cover life, then you get where your family decides to go camping, and at the lake, and you're just sitting there like, um,
Mm.
do I really
Mm.
want to go swimming?
Yeah.
Absolutely not. There is
Yeah.
nothing in this world you can do to get me into that water, yet you have to pretend that you love swimming and you love water, and the whole time you're sitting there like hyper vigilant, having PTSD, but you can't show anybody. And, you know, for me, I had to be like, I really love books more, so bring my book and sit on the side. And but then you're also terrified because you've seen so much happen to other kids or other people in the simulation rooms that the whole time you are hyper vigilant, watching your family, being protective, fearful that something bad is just going to pop up. It can come, because you learn that, there are no, um, there's no, we'll say, solid physical in that world. So things can change size. And so then it even transposes where when you have to bathe or take a shower, you get fearful, is something going to come up the drain, is, and attack you. So it's really hard because in your cover life, you can't let any of that stuff out. You have no outlet or expression for that fear. Um, you have to really learn to cope with it, which, you know, usually the ways you're going to do that is, um, I guess there's a lot of different ways you're going to do that, but for a lot of children, it's easiest just to block it out, suppress the memory. No, it's not real. It didn't happen to me. It was my imagination, because that's a word that they use. Oh, that didn't happen. That's just your imagination. You'll get that when you're coming out of those simulation rooms. So then that's the easiest one to pick up and believe, that, oh, it was just my imagination. It was just a nightmare, or, I was napping. Um, we call it waking up, but, like, to actually stand there in front of their faces and, not do what they tell you to do when you come out is really difficult. For most kids, when you come out or they pull you out, the first thing they're going to do is tell you it's nap time, lay you down on a mat, and they're going to, start bringing you down out of that spiritual experience. When you open your eyes again, they're going to tell you, oh, you were having a nightmare, but you're okay. You're safe now. They're going to create that safe environment. You may be back in your classroom that you started off in at school somewhere, and your mom and dad, it's time for them to come pick you up. Or, they wake you up and, oh, it's snack time. Here, have a
That's deception.
banana.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's
I mean,
such
it's like,
deception.
how do kids ever trust adults after going through that? I can imagine as a child, when you see every adult in your environment so purely evil, I mean, how does
Well,
a
you're
child?
trained. You have safe people too. They cover that. You have your teacher that brings you out of nap time, that has the snack and is so sweet, and, rubs your shoulder and your back and tells you it's okay, that you had a nightmare, but you're safe now. That's one of your safe people. You learn to trust your safe people.
But
For
you wouldn't
me,
you as the
Lori
child?
Cavington,
Sorry, wouldn't you as the child know, Ash? I mean, you're coming out of your nap and she says it's okay. You had a nightmare. I mean, but you know damn well that wasn't a nightmare. You know damn well that was real,
right,
right? So, as a child, that person saying what you experienced is not real. I mean, I can imagine, there'd be trauma bonding, or there would be kids that would go, "You're so full of crap. You know it was
right,
real. Why are you lying to me?" So I would imagine that you're either going to get one or two of those kids, right, reacting to.
right. Like me, I wouldn't nap. I would refuse. I would absolutely fight and refuse. I would not close my eyes, you know, would not do it.
Yeah,
And, but my safety people, Lori Cabot Kent was a safety person. Even though there was abuse with Carcock, Carcock was considered one of my safe people. Uh, General Val was one of my safe people. So they surround you with those safe people,
to
and
protect you.
right, and then usually your biofeedback person is considered a safe person. You know, so both my inner circle, you know, my training partner E, we're both safe people. But in that, you're not really allowed to, you're not supposed to talk about things with each other outside of your approved safe people. You know, then they have random safe people that you naturally are inclined to in your family units. You know, so there were people, you know, in my family that, um, you know, that I would go with places, I would, you know, go and do fun stuff with, um, you know, where things would be actually like normal. You know, so they would make sure that you have lots of those opportunities with your approved family safe people. You know, but those are
Wow.
also going to be people who are going to know that, you know, their job is to make sure you're not talking when you go outside of your area. You know, they're going to be with you 20, you know, all the time, making sure that, you know, how are you handling things, and are you, you know, living your cover life? If you're not, they're going to snark and you're going to get in trouble.
Keep you.
Yeah,
Wow.
so it's a very monitored system. Even though some people in your family unit, you know, the truth is that usually there's one, maybe two children out of each family unit that are chosen for different things, or to go through training and things like that. And you've got people within your family unit who are involved in that training process. But then you have others who absolutely have no idea. You know, they don't know what's happening. Um, you know, they're influenced by those who are doing the training. Um, you know, that, oh, this is what good mothers do. You know, this is, you know, how good mothers take care of their children. This is what a good wife does. You know, always making sure meals are ready, you know, things like that.
Yeah.
If
Um,
then let's say two kids in the family are being trained or tortured, would they know about it, the two that are both doing it, or would they also be isolated
it depends
from each
if
other?
their training is together.
Okay.
I've seen where training has been completely separate, where they don't know, you know, they're both experiencing things, but they don't know that the other one is experiencing things. But then you also have, if they're training you and there's some twinning involved, then you're going to be experiencing things together. You know, if there is that strong connection, what I've seen usually, it's also if the kids are different elementals, so they can use them in circles together. So like, let's say you've got one that's fire, one that's water, then they may indeed twin those two to enhance the power and the energy that's produced within a circle. So,
Wow.
and that usually is only if there is no better match for either of those siblings. You know, it's all about, you know, how do they
Mm.
enhance that circle group's power? If there is no better
Mm.
match, then they're going to put those two together.
Yeah. And they probably get threatened with each other's lives, right? If they have to open their mouths.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Or
Hmm.
the other thing too is you do become enemies. I mean, really, it is a love-hate relationship.
Hmm.
You absolutely depend on each other for survival. At the same time, you also would, you know, would give up one another, um, you know, in order to save your own life or save somebody that you absolutely love in your family. You
Yeah.
know, so it's that constant place of what they call equilibrium, you know,
Yeah.
where
Totally.
you're constantly
Hmm.
having the two forces at play between good and evil.
And conflicted. Yeah. I can imagine how conflicting that must
Yeah.
be.
And you
Wow.
have to
Wow.
choose,
Wow.
you know?
Good.
Gosh.
So,
Sure. Wow.
yeah.
Okay. Well, we kind of like, I think we've had you on
Yeah, so we
for over
made it
two.
through, like we started into the little 1.5 there. We've got lamp versus laser is kind of where we're going next, and frequency following responses. So, and I'm kind of doing it a little like we covered some of this in the pre-primer, where I read it out. So I'm trying to, relate it now more to the experiences that survivors would have going through this, and sharing some of this, my own memories. Um, because I think that that's going to be more powerful as we go through this if you can relate to it versus if we're just
Absolutely.
reading all their mumbo jumbo
Yeah.
report.
No, absolutely, and
Mhm.
I think it's so amazing. Thank you for sharing your experiences with us on this, because I think it's so important for us to know these things. Thank you so much to all our amazing viewers out there for joining us. As you can see, I've got Dark Vader breathing his shadowy breath all over me. He's back in town. I have him for, like, at the moment, 10 hours a day.
Hours out and, darn power sharing.
Anyway, okay, guys. Jess, is there
Uh,
anything else from you before we end off and you can pray for us?
Yeah, no, let's pray. So, Lord, we thank you for the strength to look back, and I just pray for everybody who's out there listening, Lord. Give us different tools, methods, if we need to sit down and draw pictures, if we need to write out memories that this conversation has stimulated. I ask for your hedge of protection as they do that, that they would just be able to process. And we ask for that safety and that feeling of safety as they're doing that processing. And in that, Lord, I ask that you would just um, show us how to navigate this healing journey in our lives, that we may have that wholeness that we desire. So we ask this in your powerful name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Amen. Thank you, Jess, so much.
You.
Guys, thanks so much again. And for everyone who supported our channel, really, really appreciate you. We will see you next week back with Jesse again, where we'll go through it about completing. We'll certainly be going through
Go
the
through.
next. Yeah, there you go. We will, of the Gateway experience. So if you haven't, share this. If you haven't watched the interview before, please do that as well. And seriously, please just share this information. It's so important for all of us to know. Coolness and light. So then I will see you on the flip side. I don't know when that is. Maybe we see Jesse on Sunday again for Patreon Book Club, right?
Yes.
So
Yep.
those of you who want to join the Patreon Book Club, that is again at what time on 8? 3 p.m. for us.
9
And
Eastern.
9 a.m.
9
for Jesse.
Eastern.
Yes, you did it.
Whoa. All right. God bless you all, guys. Mwah. Take care, and we'll see you soon.
Ciao.
Well, hello, everybody. It's wonderful Wednesday. Welcome to Aquarius Rising Africa, your favorite YouTube channel, clearly sharing uncomfortable truths. So, we're very happy to be sharing lots of uncomfortable truths, because what can we say? The world is not a very comfortable place right now. That's for sure. Jess and I were just having a conversation off air. Cray times indeed. Anyway, hello Jesse, welcome. We don't
Hello,
have Mornay
hello.
today. Yeah, he's gone. His power went off in Namibia, so he doesn't have power and internet and all sorts of things like that. So it's us girls. We're in it here in
Yeah.
Aquarius Rising today. So how are you? How's the week been, beautiful lady?
Oh, very good. Yes. Busy, but good.
Awesome. You got anything to share with us? Anything you're doing? Any shenanigans?
Yeah, always lots of shenanigans. So, um, just a lot of prayers and stuff. We're working, trying to help raise funds for our champs, our survivors, our veterans. And it's just interesting how, every year it seems like there's certain seasons where people, have more trouble than others. And, without fail, the summer is one of those where you know, like in reality, a lot of people with their families, you know, kids are off school, they want to go out, they want to, you know, enjoy fun times and just really, you know, enjoy time with their family. Yet they tend to get hit with all sorts of stuff, you know, vehicle
Absolutely.
repairs, house repairs, medical bills. And I know so many of us, you know, I mean, I got to loop myself into that too, where it seems like you just get this stack of things that stack up and, you know, you're like, huh, why does this happen every year? But I just want to encourage everybody who's going through that, you know, you're not the only one. And, you know, really it takes all of us to get through these times together. And, you know, reach out if you need prayer. Send me an email, let me know
Absolutely.
what's going on, and we'll add you to our prayer list and stuff. And just keep, you know, our champions, our veterans, and survivors in prayer as well. So,
Absolutely. There's so much going on, you know. And just a few days ago, I was saying to, in fact, I think, I can't remember exactly who I was saying it to, but it was people that were on the show. And, you know, what I think what we're seeing right now with so many overcomers, survivors coming to the fore, this is
mhm,
going to be the stuff that healers in future need to be dealing with. I don't know what your take
yeah.
is on that. A lot of the people coming out of SRA and very, very PTSD, blokes that have been in the military, um, everywhere. I mean, what is your take on that? I really think it's, yeah, from my side, it's, I think,
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing a lot more too. And with it, though, I think it, you know, really what's behind it is God is moving to heal people.
yes.
And, you know, as the Spirit of God is moving, I'm seeing more people come forward, more people, you know, for the first time in their lives being willing to open up and share about their past, their background. Um, you know, so there's, I guess I would put it, if I could put a word to it, it feels like there's a breakthrough in
Mm.
vulnerability, people being
Yes.
willing to just lay out there what has been hidden for so long. And we really need that, you know, we need that silence broken, and we need people not to be afraid to share, and knowing that as we share each thing we've been through, somebody out there needs to hear it, somebody
Mm.
else needs healing in that area too. So, you know, it's really encouraging because as one person steps out, you see many others who receive healing through that simple act of faith, you know?
Absolutely. And it's beautiful to see because it's, you know, as more and more people are speaking, and I'm seeing this just, you know, with the overcomers that have been on this channel for since the beginning. I mean, you know,
Mhm,
you've been here since the beginning, and with all the overcomers that have started speaking, it's amazing to see how many of those women, and I say women, I don't know men, not the
mhm,
ones I know of, and I'll say specifically women, have got their own platforms, have now got their own channels, and are actually
mhm.
interviewing other people, you know, that have been coming out of the system. It's
Yeah,
really, 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 it's amazing to see. And yeah, I know that you said to us, I think sometime last year, you said, this is just the beginning. You know, we're starting to reveal more and more. And my gosh, I've got to say that I can now
yeah,
start seeing, and I don't know how deep this rabbit hole goes, but I'm very grateful for, and I know our viewers are too, for what you're sharing with us and the information
mhm,
that you do, you know, that you impart to us. It's very, very valuable. And as I've
yeah.
as well in the past couple of weeks doing this gateway experience, I think we really, really need to take notice of this because this is where this is
It's
the
huge.
exactly this is the entry point, so to speak,
Mhm.
that the mind control starts, right? And if we're aware of how it's done and what they're doing, knowledge
But
is
they
power.
you need to clarify because this is completely separate from the mind control.
Yeah,
You've got an aspect that, you know, there's that it kind of paves the way for that, but it's completely separate.
yeah,
Um, you know, this is kind of some of the, I would say, the prep work that, depending on which portion people are going into based on how their spirit interacts. But
Yeah.
This is kind of separate. It's part of the initial testing that you go through where they're figuring out how did God make you and how do you function and work, both your physical body in conjunction with your spiritual body. Yeah, so a little bit different than the mind control, but
So using that information, they get to manipulate and contort a lot of the frequencies, if you will, the energies, because we know everything is created from energy. So they get to control and contort that to their for their nefarious agendas, right?
right.
And that's what we're seeing. So anyway, we started with part one last week. So I'd love for us to continue, where you can just explain to us again. I think we were on the number 3, right?
Was it number 3 or number 5? I had number
5, sorry,
5, but
gateway and hemisync. Yes, gateway and hemisync. That's where we
yeah.
started.
So we
That's
had
good.
got, we had talked through like the 3 main ways that they begin to see how you respond, um, to the different, or let's put it, how do you respond to the spirit world? How do you see and perceive in that spirit world? So I talked about how, they do some initial tests when you're in basically pre-K or kindergarten, where, they're going to do some visualization type testing where, a teacher's going to say, hey, we're going to the South Pole, and she's going to count backwards, and the children that kind of trance out during that, they're going to respond to hypnosis. Um, then the next round, they're going to see who can come into the spirit world through meditation type means. So they'll ask a further question, asking, kids, what do you see? And try to pull them in through that meditation. And then the last group comes in through biofeedback, which means that, they're like as far as I understand, the biofeedback kids, like, there's 2 types of remote viewing, which remote viewing is the scientific term for how you see, hear, and feel in the spirit world. So, it's not as scary of a term as many Christians make it out to be. Um, remote viewing doesn't mean that you're astro projecting. It means how are you perceiving that spirit world? So, there's 2 ways. The first is, that you do have your spirit separate from your body, which is astral projection. And most of the time, children that gain access to that spirit world through either hypnosis or um, meditation, that's what they're taught. They're taught to astral project. Then you have the second group that, you know, they don't astral project, their spirit doesn't separate from their body, and they see everything in the spirit world as though it's a vision. So there can even be overlap where, like for me, like, I can be awake, I can be looking at where I'm presently at, and yet I can be seeing in the spirit world clearly someplace else at the exact same time. So there's an overlap between the physical and the spiritual world. So that's what they're trying to figure out. So as they go further, like, I would say, these next few pieces, section 5 through probably beyond, um, in this Gateway project, really talk to, what is the next step, after they figure out how you get into the spirit world, then they want to develop a consistency, because you can't have it be random. You can't always, what they don't want is to always have a timekeeper over you, somebody that's going to bring you into that spirit world. They want you to be able to figure out how do you get into that spirit world on your own. So, what I witnessed was a lot of the kids that did go in through hypnosis, um, which means you're going to have somebody that basically is going to dial you in. They would try to get that individual to learn to enter into the spirit world, through other means where, they would try to train them to, let me think how to put this. Because you always will have a gate operator, especially at the military bases. That person is going to be somebody who helps dial in and dial out. They're going to open the gate that's being used, and they're going to close that gate when the use is done. They're able to track in the spirit world, so you can make your contact, like you're taught how to contact that individual if you need a dial out or dial in someplace. So, from the get-go, you're always trained on a team, with others who are very skilled at whatever their part of the job is. And, so some of it, are set on auto responses. So, as you get more advanced, like some of those kids that, go in through hypnosis or somebody's dialing them in, they're trained so that then specific songs or specific words or specific images, can automatically dial them in or out. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so that's where they
Absolutely.
get those kids. Other ones, if you're able to enter in on your own, you also are taught some of those methods that, where you could hear a song, but then it goes beyond that, because at the deepest levels, you learn that it's not just that song that's connected to a spiritual gate, but it's, each gate has its own, tune, has its own set of notes, and it doesn't matter which format those notes are put in, just as long as you're in harmony with that gate, you can enter in. So, you learn to kind of do that on your own instead of always having somebody there, um, who's controlling that aspect, even though, you know, for the majority of it, you do work as a team, but, they do teach you to be self sufficient as well. So, the next part talks about the gateway and the hemisync. And with that, the goal really is that they want to proceed to focus on what the technique actually involves. So fundamentally, the gateway experience is a training system. So, we talked about that last week, how this isn't programming, this is training.
Yeah.
And it's designed to bring enhanced strength, focus, and coherence, to the amplified and frequency of brainwave output between the left and the right hemispheres, so as to alter consciousness. So, what that means, is basically so you can perceive between the physical and the spiritual world interchangeably, and moving it outside the physical sphere so as to ultimately escape even the restrictions of time and space. We talked about how the spirit world has no, there is no time, there is no space there. All of that is irrelevant in the spirit world, because you're really dealing with, as scripture says, our God is a God forever. He is the beginning, He is the end, yet there is not a beginning or an end that we can find, because He's eternal. And we're not used to operating in that eternal realm. And, but that's really where we're taught, that spirit world is eternal. There isn't, um, an end date or an end time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So,
Absolutely.
so they're going to study, they're going to focus on, um, bringing that left and right together, um, so that, you both are putting out equally at the same time. And, that and then they try to measure that brain energy or power. So they're doing tests to try to figure out, how you function in that spirit world. Now, part 6 goes into the lamp versus the laser. And Melissa Yeager was somebody who was highly involved with these experiments. So it quotes her and says she uses a metaphor to help clarify the process involved in the use of hemisync in the gateway experience. She points out that the human mind in its natural state may be likened to an ordinary lamp, which expends energy in the form of both heat and light, but in a chaotic, incoherent way, which diffuses its energy over a wide area and rather limited depth. So we think about that, if you have a light bulb in a room, you're going to have, light that is spread out and lighting up that whole room. But really, that light energy is chaotic, meaning, it's just going around in an area, very dispersed. It's not like controlled light. So, when we're operating just at normal, our brain function, it's kind of the same way, where, we're able to move, live, breathe, and we're exerting lots of energy, but we're not like in full focus control of that energy. So, really what they want to figure out is, and teach you, is how to control that spiritual energy that you possess. And they want to know how expansive it is, how far can, your energy go? Can you, is it just that you can, pick up things in the spirit from one room to the next, or just in the room where you're at? Or are you able to pick up things that are going on in the spirit world that are in other dimensions, wherever you're at? How expansive is that, And can you pick up things in multiple dimensions at one time? Or, only one dimension, can your focus only be drawn to one thing in one dimension, or can you see the whole picture? Now, if we were to put that in another term, somebody once described it really well to me. They were asking like how I perceived, my position on the battlefield. And, when we think in that spirit world, really we are on battlefields. And do we just see ourselves like on the ground, where we're face to face with the enemy? Do we see ourselves as though we're like up on a hill and we can kind of see, we're looking down below? Or do we see ourselves in an aerial position where we can see everything, the whole battle, and we can see beyond, like, you know, is the enemy coming from, far away? And we see the current battle, plus we see all the movement around. So that's really what they're looking at, is what is your perspective of that spirit world? And, based on how you perceive is going to be how they position or use you in that battlefield. So with this, then it goes to the next step, where as they see how you perceive, how do you gather energy and how are you able to control that energy output? So, for the majority of people, if you learn, um, to do something in the spirit, let's just say it's healing. So, you could learn that if you put your hands on somebody and pray for them, that person receives healing. So therefore, you understand that there has to be a direct contact between you and that individual, and the Lord, for that person to receive healing. Okay, so that's like the basic step, one-on-one direct contact. The second step would be, can you separate yourself and still, through prayer, um, can that person receive that healing? So let's say, you're in your own private house, they're in their own private house, you're praying for them, you speak the healing over them, they receive it. Okay, so now you've kind of taken a step apart where there's a distance between no longer is it physical touch to touch healing. You now have a spiritual healing where your spirit is able to bring healing to them through their spirit. Okay. Well, then it goes a step farther, where ultimately, are you able to pray and speak that healing? Maybe you don't have a direct contact person, so you're not aiming it at any specific individual. However, you're aiming that prayer, let's just say, at everybody who has neuropathy. Okay. And so the best way to explain this is kind of if you think satellites. So you're praying to the Lord, and you're saying, Lord, I'm asking for a healing for every single person that has neuropathy. And as that prayer, that energy is directed at those satellites, automatically it goes out to every single person across the world who needs healing from neuropathy. Okay. So now that authority, that power that you have in the spirit world has grown immensely. And they want to know, how vast is that? They want to know beyond, we gave the example of prayer, but really, the military, they're looking at both sides. They want to know, what can you do for good? And are you inclined to do good or light side healing type things or blessings for humanity? Or are you inclined towards the dark side? Could you do the same thing with curses? And how expansive can those curses be?
What do they test? What are the tests they would give you? And also, this kind of coincides with maybe something that I think we spoke about a number of months ago regarding the Freemasons. Um, it's like, many people will join, let's say, whatever Freemason lodge they're at. But they would, from what I've heard, is that they would watch them over time. They would, let's say, do the ceremonies and stuff and maybe give them stuff to drink or eat, and then they would tell from someone, I think, said to me something about drinking wine or I don't know, blood out of a skull.
Mhm.
So that sort of thing. So they would see if they're prone to that sort of thing or not. And the ones
Yeah,
that would be more prone to it would then be invited into the darker side of things, while the other
right.
ones remain the cover, right?
Yeah, I mean,
So,
that's going to be in the chamber of reflection, which is symbolized by the rooster. And, that's when you go into the lodge, you'll have, the black and white checkered floor. And that will always represent that there's a secret chamber below that. Oh, let me just see if I cut out or. So you'll always see that black and white checker floor. And then that symbolizes that there's a chamber underneath that, which is the chamber of reflection. And you have to, enter that through the spirit world. Um, so as you enter into that, you're going to see a desk, and that desk is going to have different items on it. Um, you're meant to reflect. It's going to have a book, which ironically usually is a Masonic Bible. You're going to have the compass, you're going to have a candle. In fact, there'll be 3 candles. 2 will be lit that you'll light, and the third one you don't light. That's for whatever spirit enters in at that time. You'll know when it's present when that third candle lights. And then there will be that skull there, and they'll just have it sitting there filled with blood. So there's nobody that tells you you have to drink that or you have to do that. Like, it's just sitting there, and they'll wait to see who will take a drink. And those that are willing to do that, they will then, enter into the darker side of things. Yeah, so interesting. And then ours, we also, another thing was like this, it's almost like a gold plate, and they would have, this thin layer of water on it. I don't know what it's officially called, but it's used for divining in the spirit. And, in that you can see a spiritual reflection of things of that person, that you're trying to look at or see. So yeah, so that's
I just
go
sorry,
ahead.
Jess, while we're still there. So let's say through these tests of drinking blood and taking them into the creepier side of things, what about the kids, or let's say the kids, because it usually begins there, um, the ones that don't? So they're the ones that want to do good and refuse to do no harm and stuff like that. But yet somehow, from what the stories you've been telling us as well, there's the light side of the system that sort of
Hmm.
heal with their light magic and white magic and stuff like that. My question is, the people, men and women on the light side of the system, then the ones that don't do any harm, do they go through the same type of um, rituals, abuse?
Usually no.
What would they then go through if they are going into something that is all healy feely and what have you? What type of
You
training
have
would
you
they go
have
through?
different things. So, the first thing that I'll say for that is, those children who are hierarchy, who go through the light side, they don't experience the same type of rituals. For them, uh, things are put into different perspectives. Um, for that light side, for, let's just say, for the girls, um, virginity is something that is highly prized. Now, when we say virginity, though, the system has loopholes with that. So, technically, a girl is considered a virgin as long as there's been no penetration of her hymen vaginally. So it doesn't mean that she hasn't experienced sexual abuse that is either, oral or partaken in that, or anal. So, the same thing with boys. They can technically be considered virgins, yet that just means that they have not done any penetration, but it doesn't mean that they haven't been sexually abused anally. So, in that, they really push the virginity thing, that those, that it's very prized, that those are chosen people, that they're set apart for this special, marriage and ceremony. And one of the things that I witnessed, and there are, several different, I'll say there's different types of what we call the spear of destiny. Um, there is like an ultimate trial that they do with that, where you're basically skewered with that. And, that's like one of the first times that you'll um, kind of, in a way, perform your own healing on your body. Um, I tell a story about how, this was apart from the Spear of Destiny thing, but how, my proctor had taken one of the skewers that's used for, and it's not necessarily a skewer, but it's more like a long tap that was used to, procure hormones from the pineal gland. And she had taken that and, had struck me and my training partner in the side with it. And then we did have the witchy healers come and heal that up. But with this, one of the spirit destiny things that I witnessed was, as those girls that were set apart as virgins, and I think, I'm trying to remember, I really believe that they were probably between ages 13 and 16. but they lay them down on a big, slab altar, and they test to see if the hymen has been broken. And if not, they break that with the spear of destiny, and then consider that those girls, they verify that those girls are pure and holy, and then, the bidding for their marriage starts. So that was one of the ones that I witnessed. Um, and in that, they totally don't even think about the sexual abuse that they're, it's like these poor girls are basically going through a form of sexual abuse, but they don't even see it that way because there's such a pride that's given because they've made it that far as a virgin, right? And it's like a celebration thing, and they don't even think about, hey, I just had to lay down on a table in front of all of these, you know, matrons and patrons and basically elderly men and women who, have a white sheet laying down, and they're gonna make sure that girl bleeds after they've poked her with that spear, It's like just the abuse with that is
Who
crazy.
would be examples of women in the system, if you can name names, that would be on the light side of the system, that would have taken on that side?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, at the highest levels, you had individuals, one I've named in my affidavits, but you've got people like Callista Gingrich, um, who would have been on that side. Some of the Jones, um, you had like Joan Rivers, who would have been considered light side.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting that this mentioning Joan Rivers, because she mentioned that Michelle Obama was a man, and not
Mm.
long after that, she was taken out. Do you think that was obviously because
I
of that?
think it was because she had revealed stuff, but
Why do you think she revealed that as a matter of interest? I mean,
I think she was being purposeful in that.
hmm, interesting.
Yeah. Witchy
Well,
battles behind the scene, I don't know.
yeah, who knows
Yeah.
what anything is possible. Anyway, Jess, thanks for the diversion.
Yeah. So, as the tests go on, then, as they see your visual, your um aural perception, then they're going to next look at frequency. So, that's um, another word for that, and they get into resonance after this. But we all have a soul resonance that is slightly different, and that's because we're all a working body um, together. So each of us have a different function, we all have a different role, and within that, the best way to describe it is God has, all of us together are like this piece of a music. Um, you know, and as that music comes together, you've got some parts that work faster than others, some that resonate higher than others. So they're going to look at all those different aspects. Do you resonate at bright tones, which are going to be major, could be major tones? Are you connected to the melody of that song, um, with your soul function? Or do you resonate at the minor tones? Are you connected to, um, a slower soul resonance? Now, all of that interconnects with the spiritual gates and your perception. So, like for me, my soul resonance really is like at a D minor. So, that's the majority of the major gates are at that D minor tone. And, that means also that I see better, you know, when I'm in the lower realms. So, my visual acuity, if I'm in the lower realms, is, you know, 100% versus, as I'm in the middle or the next higher realms, my vision isn't as acute. Like, and that's the way God made me. Like, I, was not tuned necessarily to the angelic army. I couldn't necessarily always see their place on the battlefield. I didn't see every angel. Where I was tuned was every demonic, member of the principalities and their commanders. That's what I would see. And why? Because that's how God made me. Um, so they're going to look at, that frequency, where you can go, where you can't go. Now, in the old days, as they did this, they would find ways to um, share with each other in the brotherhood who who had which part, which dimensions can you go into. So the old ways were done, for those hierarchy kids through lace. You start off with the very simple laces that just have, like a singular dimension to them. That would tell anybody that you were really good at the first or second or third realms. And then it would get to the more complicated lace, which would be, that specialty Italian or other country laces that were very elaborate, would tell them that you were a 10th dimensional access person. Later, it morphed into the diamonds. So, that's how they can tell, which, their rings of power are usually just a single dark stone. That tells that that's the symbol for all access. That means, you're good, you're skilled at every dimension. But otherwise, you've got your singular dimension, diamonds, all the way up to, the most elaborate cuts, which represent the multi-dimensionalism. So then, it became, as you went to a party or, you went into an event, um, for whether it was men or women, you could look at that individual's ring on their finger or their jewels that they were wearing, and you would automatically know who you could have sex magic with or who you were not allowed to have sex magic with. Like, if you're a 10th dimension person, you're not just going to hang out on the first dimensional realm. They want to have that ultimate experience, which is why they're going to, have the sex slaves that are multidimensional for them. So those became ways that they would mark, um, those beta kitty sex slaves. And later they started then with the tattoos, the monarch butterfly then, becoming that symbol um, of, above level 4 dimensional access, because you've got the 4 wings, upper, lower of the butterfly, and that representing the 4 dimensional quadrants, and who has access to that. So, and then the little triangle with the 3 dots, uh, those would be up to 3rd dimensional access beta kitty sex slaves, which is
When
going to
we
be a little bit lower realm, and definitely your physical realm is the 3rd dimension.
so when we're talking about lace, we're talking about a fabric.
Yes.
So what you're saying is what type of lace? Let's say I'm going to a party and I have lace on my collar.
Yeah, it would usually be the collar or on the hem of the dress, on the sleeves, or it could be on the hairpiece, the bonnets.
So if we just look at the one that I see, that as far as that is Catherine when she gave birth, sitting with her, arriving with her red dress that looked like Rosemary's Baby,
Yeah.
and the lace collar. Now, what was that? From what you're telling us now, what did that picture represent with the lace that she was wearing?
Yeah, it was representing, dimensional access that she has, that was then being handed down generationally to that child.
Wow, that's insane. And the diamonds, when you're saying the diamonds, obviously, again, when we're looking at the presidents, the elites, whatever, would
Yeah.
that be the size of the diamond, the cut of the diamond?
It's mostly the cut of the diamond. So like if there's like a three-way cut on it, that represents the third dimension, going all the way up to the crown cut, which is very complicated, which is going to be your 10th dimensional access.
Wow.
Yep.
So, why would they want to gain access to the 10th dimension? What happens there?
In the 10th dimension. Oh,
Yeah.
that's where all the shenanigans happen, Chantel.
Well, I know I can certainly feel the shenanigans going on there, but I have not had an invitation.
Right? You haven't.
So, I want to go gate crash.
That would be fun to go gate crash, it really would be. Yeah, it
Absolutely. I
just,
think I,
it depends on, you're talking, and I don't want to use the terms whole other worlds per se, but in reality, we have things that are going on, um, in these other dimensions that, really, you've got people who are there, you've got things happening. Heaven is not just a boring place where you've got little children angels sitting on clouds singing all day. Really, it's a kingdom, and it operates like a kingdom, and everything that is um, you know, on earth is a replication of what's in heaven or what's in these other dimensions. So thinking about it that way, um, let me just quick message somebody here who's trying to call us. But so that's probably the best way to answer that question.
cool.
Yeah.
But it goes both ways, right? These dimensions.
Yeah, you've got the upper and the lower realms. And when we think about that, the best way I can describe it, people want to put the earth like into either a sphere or into the flat earth experience, right? And the easiest way to describe what's happening is to combine both.
Yes.
I use that flat earth really to talk about the third dimension, but you've got to take it beyond that, because the word of God, what does it say? That the word has height, depth, breadth, width, and all of creation was spoken. The Lord spoke it. So it's not just a singular one dimensional picture. When you even think of that sphere, you're talking that there's multiple rings that are going every direction around that sphere, all in this harmony together. And there you can access any of those dimensions or spiritual energy points, you know, at any time. And most of us are just not taught to do that. It's really suppressed. Up until about age 3 to 5, our imagination is encouraged because the system is trying to figure out how you perceive, and if you're chosen for a position, what position they want you in based on how you perceive in that spirit world. But if you're not chosen, then immediately they will start to hinder any imagination that you're having. They'll say, "Oh, well, now you got to grow up." You know, that's not something real you're seeing in the spirit world. They don't even mention the spirit world. they'll just say, oh no, that's your imagination, and now you need to grow up. Big girls don't hear things. If you're hearing something, or you're seeing something, that's a hallucination or an audio visual disturbance. It's not normal is the next thing they tell you, that it's not normal, and you now need mental health to help you control that, right?
When they've been the very ones that have been the ones that triggered that to begin with, right?
Right,
And
opening
and
that
now when they
door. And then your spirit is, you're learning to see and feel and hear in the spirit. And then they start to tell you it's not normal. There must be something wrong with you. Now you need help. And, you need to control that. And they try to shut off the very doors that they've opened wide open. And so that really is a form of abuse, you know,
total, wow, can you
versus if
imagine
you
the poor
knew.
child?
Yeah, I mean, if you knew like that, hey, it's not good if you're hearing dark voices or demonic voices, that's not a good thing. But the truth is that maybe that's where the Lord tuned your ear, because maybe you're a spiritual warrior. Maybe you're meant to hear those voices, but you're not meant to be controlled by those voices or
Yes,
tormented day and night by those voices. And what they fail to teach you is that maybe you're hearing those because you are a spiritual warrior, and what they're lacking to do is to teach you how to walk in your authority as a warrior, where when you learn your authority, that these voices are not meant to torment you or control you. Rather, you have full authority to rebuke them and command them to be silent. And maybe God is allowing you to hear and see that because there's other people that are tormented and suffering from those spirits too. And you're meant to walk in the fullness of your authority, not in oppression to those spirits, but very aware of where the
yes,
battle is and where it's coming from,
yes.
you know?
I'm really glad you said that, because I think that is so important, and that I think is a common thing I've heard over the years with people who have spiritual gifts, and especially if they haven't been explained to them,
Hmm.
so that it is possible that you will hear someone speaking, right? And
Yeah.
and as you say, so whose voice is it, and how do you respond? And
Hmm.
most of us, especially when we're tiny and have these experiences, don't know what it is, so we
Yeah.
immediately get terrified. And of
Right.
course, immediately we get terrified, we then immediately start, that just starts getting crazy. Um, but it's amazing, because I think it's so important that you've just said that it is, you do have authority over those voices. You do
Hmm.
have the choice. And when you pray and when you're in prayer, you know that pray to God while that's happening, you will know whether it's a benevolent or a malevolent voice, either way. And it's
Right.
always just understanding how strong your connection is, basically, and
Yeah.
how in tune you are with that. But it's very interesting.
And
Wow.
tuning your ear to the Lord's voice,
Yes, absolutely.
to know his will. That, for me as a kid, you know, it was a very interesting dynamic. You know, Part of my job was to learn to, hear those principalities, to hear their plans, to hear their agenda. Where were they moving their troops? What were their goals, short term and long term? But then, with that, then I had to tune my ear to the Lord, like, okay, Lord, now I know this information. I know that they're plotting to, you know, uh, take down a certain area. How are they going to do it? They're going to destroy homes. They're going to start attacking families individually. Um, Here's what they're doing. So, Lord, what do I do with that information? How do I prevent that attack? How do I stand in the gap and intercede for those people? And, that's really where we need to shift it. Or even the spirit of suicide. I mean, that is a nasty one that likes to just go through and, hit one house after the other in an area and, take people's lives. So it's like, okay, how do we stop it so that even that first house isn't getting hit? How do, and when we understand that, that depression that is felt, that oppression is really, your feeling in the spirit world, the, you know, that heaviness of those spirits. And, you don't have to be overcome by that. Their greatest weapon is to make you believe that you have no control, that you can't rise up out of that, that there's something so wrong with you that there isn't any hope. That's what they want you to feel in that oppression. But when we realize that, hey, I do have authority, that I can say, to that spirit of suicide, get out of here. I don't want you. I'm not going to harm myself. I'm not going to harm other people. Get out of here. And,
Absolutely.
when we rebuke him and command him to go, in fact, it's not just out of your house, evict them from your state and be like, get the hell out of my state, like no suicide. We're not going to fall for it. And when we, really take that authority, we see the Spirit of God moving and lifting that oppression. And sometimes you need to fast for that. Isaiah 58, says, this is the fast the Lord desires, that you would fast so that your voice may be heard on high, and that the chains of wickedness and the yoke of oppression may be broken asunder. So really, whatever it is that, that depression, that oppression is a chain of wickedness that the enemy is putting around you. And the great thing about chains is that they can be broken, or those heavy yokes, it can be broken, it can be removed. What does
Absolutely.
scripture say? Jesus says, you know, put my yoke upon you, for my yoke is easy and it's light. Um, you know, so those things can shift, those filthy garments. It's almost like the enemy's trying to wrap us in filthy garments, and that's exactly what he says, or what it says in Zechariah 3. You have the high priest Joshua, who was one of the high priests that was in charge of building the third temple of Israel, or I'm sorry, the second temple of Israel after Israel had been taken captive and had been in the land of Babylon. So, Nehemiah and Ezra, Joshua, several others, they get together and they start rebuilding this second temple. And what happens, it says literally Satan, who's the accuser of the brethren, goes before the Lord, pulls Joshua into the courts of heaven and starts accusing him before the Lord, saying, Lord, look at his garments. They're filthy. He can't serve in your temple. Look at all the sin that's on him. And, what does the Lord say to that? It says, literally, the Lord turns to Satan and says, Satan, the Lord rebukes you. And he commands the angels, remove the filthy garments, put on Joshua clean garments. The Lord himself reclothes him in clean garments. And, as we come into that place before the Lord, all that, everything we feel that's so negative, so many times is connected to those false accusations that the enemy is bringing before the Lord about us. And, we can break through that.
Absolutely. And it's always, I mean, as we always go back to just spiritual connection, right?
Hmm.
That's all that it really boils down to at the end of the day. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, how far are we now? Do we have more? I'm just looking
We
at the
do.
time.
Let's see, we still
Okay.
got 9, 11, 12. Yeah, we got quite a bit more to still cover.
Okay,
Um,
well, I think should we? How do you feel? Do you want to maybe go through one more, or are you ready to call it a day and we'll carry on next
sure,
week?
we can go through one more.
Yeah.
So, next, this one is still connected to the resonance, which is going to be connected to the sound part. How they're breaking this down is, the different forms of perception. You've got the light, which is connected to your sight. You've got the resonance, which is going to be connected to your spiritual hearing. So this next part, the brain stimulation, that is going to be connected to the hearing, the resonance. And, it says that says resonance is of considerable importance since it is directly transmitted to and impacts upon the brain. The resulting vibration is received and transmitted into the brain itself via the fluid-filled third and left ventricles located above the brain stem. The electromagnetic pulse is then generated through stimulants and the brain to raise amplitude and frequency of brainwave output. So with this, there are several different ways that they're going to test how you react to that. Some of it, they're going to do things that whether, like I've seen, some some of those in training that have what are considered direct connects into the back of the head, where they're, inserting a needle type thing in the back of your head there, that then the vibrations, the frequency can go through that, almost directly to the brain. Um, they can do it like an indirect connect, which is going to have, like a sensor more that connects to your physical body, where then, you're picking up that vibration, that frequency. And I think that those are more used for individuals that can't, um, like you can't directly feel, hear, and see, but, they can kind of, what would you call, makeshift that connection. For those who can feel, hear, and see, like we didn't have it like that. Like ours was old audio stuff where, they're going to do the hearing test. They're going to see how high you can hear outside of the normal spectrum, how low can you hear outside of that. How is that process between, when that sound goes out and when your brain registers it? So, a lot of the old hearing tests where they're saying, okay, raise your finger when you hear that, you know, do something whenever you're hearing that sound. And they want to know how quick your mind processes what you're picking up, to the point of where even can you distinguish enough knowing which direction that sound is going to go before you even hear it. How quick is your processing, and are you processing outside or inside of time? Outside of time means that you're going to hear it before it ever happens. You're going to know, and you're going to already be moving ahead, because you're hearing that in the spirit before it ever goes off. So then they'll bring in Alice, which, if you're in that next part of testing with CERN, where you have the Hadron Collider that is governing the frequency, the resonance, and, how attuned are you to Alice, and how much can you process at one time? Because Alice, it's again taken beyond just the individual or even a group circle that you're in with other children. Now they're taking it where Alice has that ability, worldwide, or universally, to cause all those connections. And, how good are you at working with Alice? So that's going to be kind of the next step for
So
that brain
would
stimulation.
that be then for those who are opening and closing those spiritual gates? So that would be really for someone who has the aptitude, if you will, the resonance, the I don't even know what to call it, but that would be connected to those big spiritual gates, right?
Right. And it could just be one gate. You know,
Okay.
it could be that if you can, operate one gate, usually they'll have grand high priests or priestesses in a regional area. That region, the castle or mansion where they've got the spiritual gate, will be governed and controlled by that one person. So, when will they open that gate? Well, they'll open it when they're having their party or their event, for the, 4 times a year rituals that everybody from that quadrant is going to gather through that gate. So, their job is to open, close that gate, especially to the principalities that are coming through, for that event. It may mean that there's several smaller gates connected to it, um, where they've got one big gate, like one of the places, they've got a big, medium-sized gate that comes in off the water. So that's the one that the principalities are going to use. Um, from what we've seen on that property, Leviathan, um, Molech, Ashtaroth, and then you also have Satan himself who come into that area. So they come in through one gate through the water, and then it goes from the water into, this upper tiered area, where they've built like a little temple on the top of the garden areas. And then as you look down below, and follow those tiers down, you've got a big open courtyard in the garden that has, 10 gates, just random gateways, you know,
Wow.
around the square of this courtyard. And what happens is you'll have the grand high priest or priestesses, or high priest and priestesses will come in through those, smaller, spiritual gates that are connected to that courtyard. So they'll enter in that way.
Wow. This is incredible. So they've like literally taken each and every one of these aspects of, let's call it the human mind, and
Hmm.
they've been able to segregate certain aspects, enhance it, and see which people respond best to certain, whether it's the brain stimulation we're talking about now, which would
Hmm.
then get those people to be the gate openers, literally, right? So they're
Right.
testing individually for all of these things. Wow.
Yep.
They must have really sat with human beings for hours and hours and hours figuring out what does what. Do you know what I mean?
Nope, I think it was much simpler than that. Genesis 6 talks about how you have the fallen angels that, mated with the women, but they taught those women all sorts of forms of, sorcery, divination, witchcraft. I believe, since that goes all the way back to that land of Canaan, I believe that those, women that mated with the fallen angels were initially the ones that received this information, and then through the generations, through those lines, it was carried to present day.
Wow.
Because really it's all angelic, it's all angelic knowledge of how God created things, how his kingdom, his universe works. And at its core, it's meant to be good because it's a replication of his kingdom. But they've, twisted, they've tainted, they've,
Hmm.
um, made it into
Yeah,
something bad. So,
absolutely. It's like they're absolute masters of separating. Is kind of like, if you just look at how they divide and conquer, the
mhm,
tactics they use just to divide and conquer nations and people. And
right,
it's like they've been able to take the human energy system, our frequencies, and separate them as well. And then individualize what all of that is. And then it's like, as you were saying in the beginning, where it's that lamp that kind of has this unfocused light.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. It's, it shines. You can see everything that's around you, right? But they've been able to kind of split hairs on that and use each and every aspect to their advantage at the
Well, even in
expense.
society,
Yeah.
and you're right, they segregate according to that. And just here in the United States, if you think about it, some of those inner city areas, with the severe devastation, the poverty, the wickedness, that dark overall oppression and feeling, you know, you got to ask, are many of those people really tuned to be warriors in those lower realms? And instead of ever having any training or knowing how to, what their job is or their purpose is, they're kind of stuck in this environment that is so negative, so dark that, there's just such hopelessness and despair. And all they think of is, I've got to run, I've got to flee, I got to get out of this area if I want to survive. Um, so, they do that, but then they never really find, what their true purpose or destiny was. That, they were made to be in those trenches, in the nitty-gritty, overcoming the deepest, darkest spiritual strongholds. They're made with grit. They're made to withstand that type of heat of the battle. And when they flee from it, they're never going to feel that full purpose because they never really, were activated to live in that full purpose. The same thing with those that are super wealthy, right? Everything in their life is, light and, you know, open and good, or so it seems on the outside. And really, are they meant to kind of access those higher realms? Are they meant to walk in that goodness, that place of, where
Mm,
they're able to open those storehouse doors, they're able to distribute to those who are in need, um, and maybe they never find their true purpose either. So you've got where, I think that there's further testing and experiments that the system does, where people are actually in places, that are somewhat allowing them to be where they are meant to be, but they never learn the full extent of what they're supposed to do or who they are, you
exactly.
know,
So now they're just muddling.
right?
Yeah. Wow. One day this will all make sense. I'm a
One
firm
day.
believer in that. One day it'll all make sense. Wow. Okie dokie, everybody. This brings us to the end of today's beautiful show with our lovely Jessie. So thank you so much, Jess, and to all our viewers who have joined us for today's chat. Really, really enjoyed that. And we do have a double show next week, right?
Yes, sure.
I think so. So, double show next week. Prepare yourselves, and you never know what could appear on that show.
Right.
So, okay, guys, thank you so much, Jess. Is there anything else you would like to say before we end off in prayer?
No, let's go ahead and pray. So, Heavenly Father, we just thank you so much for this day. We thank you that you're bringing us to that place where we can have understanding and knowledge and wisdom about how this system has worked, maybe some of the things that have happened to other survivors or other people who have gone through the same things that I have. We thank you that you will just continue to give us further knowledge and revelation about this. And I ask that with that knowledge, Lord, that you also would bring the healing that we need, that you would help us to process. And I just pray that grace over each one who's hearing this today, that they would have your grace to be able to process the memories of things that they've gone through, that you will just give them that firm, solid ground to stand on, that they would not worry or be afraid at the memories or the puzzle pieces coming forward. We trust that that grace is going to be exactly what we need, so that in all things, having all that we need, we can abound in every good work that you've called us to, according to your word in 2 Corinthians 9:8. So we thank you, and we just ask for that blessing in Jesus' powerful name. Amen.
Amen, amen, amen. Thank you so much, Jess. I'm just checking at our comments after I've opened my eyes, which look very bright in my bright light here. And yeah, load shedding's on the way again. But anyway, we're having fun and games in the winter here. Makes us cuddle up to each other.
Right.
Our poor cats are in severe danger of being squeezed to death at night.
Right. So cute.
Those are my cuddle buddies.
See you with all your cuddle buddies.
Exactly. Okay, guys. Jess, thank you so much. Oh, and great news, guys. I want to just tell you that Jesse's going to be joining us actually again on Tuesday next week at 4 p.m. my time, which is 10 a.m. Jesse time.
Yep, 10 a.m.
And she's going to be joining me on the show with Alice Parola. So that's going to be a cool one. We're going to be obviously talking about the mental label, so to speak, and the personality. I don't want to say disorders, because it's not that. I just wish we could call it something else. I'm still going to find a name. I think we should, because I think it's been labeled for so long, just kind of mental situations and dealing with it and how to recognize it and healing in the family, all of these amazing things that we are seeing so much at this point in time. And we're saying again, and I say it so often, that this is the time we're going to be seeing more and more people, survivors and overcomers, surfacing from hectic PTSD, SRA, all of this stuff. And I think it's just such a beautiful time for all of us to know what's going on. Let us, even if we ourselves are not affected by these things, let us have enough compassion and respect for our fellow brothers and sisters, and just educate ourselves about what they're going through.
Right. Couldn't have said it
Cool.
better.
Okay, guys and girls, like, share, subscribe, please. This is really important information. See you soon. God bless you all. Oh, yeah, I've got to put wait, I've got to get myself out of here. I've got to go like this. Which one? There we go.